The girl cowering behind the rain barrel had eyes like those of a deer cornered by wolves, and Nathaniel Anders knew exactly what kind of monster had put that look there. He had ridden into Platteville, Colorado on a dusty afternoon in June of 1878, looking for nothing more than a hot meal and a bed that did not move beneath him like his horse did. The town sat in the shadow of the Rockies, a collection of wooden buildings that had sprung up around the railroad depot and mining operations that brought men seeking fortune and often finding only hardship. Nathaniel had been tracking a gang of outlaws who had robbed a bank in Denver 3 weeks prior, but the trail had gone cold somewhere between there and here. He figured he would rest a day or two before heading back empty-handed. The commotion started just as he was tying his horse to the hitching post outside the general store. A man's voice, rough and slurred with whiskey, bellowed from the alley between the store and the boarding house. The words were vulgar, threatening, the kind that made decent folk hurry past with their heads down. Nathaniel was not the type to walk away from trouble, even when common sense suggested he should. He rounded the corner of the building and took in the scene quickly. A heavy-set man with a beard stained yellow from tobacco swayed on his feet, one meaty hand gripping a bottle, the other reaching toward a young woman who had pressed herself against the wall. She wore a simple cotton dress that had seen better days, and her dark hair hung loose around her shoulders. What struck Nathaniel most was not her appearance, but her reaction when the drunk man raised his voice again. She flinched so violently that she nearly fell, her hands flying up to protect her head, her whole body tensing as if expecting a blow. "Leave her be," Nathaniel said, keeping his voice level and calm. He did not reach for his gun, not yet. Sometimes a drunk man could be reasoned with if you did not back him into a corner. The man wheeled around, nearly losing his balance. "This ain't your business, stranger. The girl owes me. Her daddy owed me, and now he's dead, so she's got to pay his debts. I do not think she owes you anything that gives you the right to corner her in an alley." The drunk man's face reddened. He dropped the bottle and it shattered on the ground. His hand went to the knife at his belt. Nathaniel's hand moved faster, his revolver clearing leather before the other man's fingers even closed around the handle of his blade. "Do not," Nathaniel said quietly. There was steel in his voice now, the kind that came from years of dealing with men who thought violence solved everything. "Walk away. Sleep it off. In the morning, if you still think you have a grievance, we can discuss it like civilized people." For a long moment, the alley was silent except for the drunk man's heavy breathing. Then, perhaps recognizing that he was outmatched, he spat on the ground and stumbled away, muttering curses under his breath. Nathaniel kept his gun drawn until the man had disappeared around the corner. Only then did he holster it and turn his attention to the young woman. She had not moved. She stood frozen against the wall, her eyes wide and fixed on the ground. Her breathing came in short, quick gasps, and Nathaniel realized she was in the grip of genuine terror. This was not simple fear of a drunk man. This was something deeper, something that had been carved into her over time. He took a step closer and she flinched again, a small wounded sound escaping her throat. Nathaniel stopped immediately and raised his hands, showing her they were empty. "Miss," he said, and even though he thought his voice was gentle, she cringed. He saw her whole body tighten, saw her eyes squeeze shut as if she could make herself disappear by not seeing him. Understanding came slowly, but it came. She was afraid of voices, of loud sounds, of men perhaps. Nathaniel had seen this before, though not often. He had seen it in children who had survived raids, in women who had endured things he did not want to imagine. Whatever had happened to this young woman, it had left her shattered in ways that were not visible but were perhaps more damaging than any physical wound. He crouched down slowly, making himself smaller, less threatening. When he spoke again, he pitched his voice barely above a whisper, soft as the evening breeze that rustled through the cottonwood trees. "I will only speak softly. You have my word," he said. "I am not going to hurt you. My name is Nathaniel Anders. I am going to stay right here, and I am not going to come any closer unless you want me to. You are safe now." The change was not immediate, but gradually her breathing slowed. Her eyes opened, though she still did not look directly at him. She was young, perhaps 20 or 21, with delicate features that might have been pretty if they were not drawn so tight with fear. Her hands still trembled, clutching the fabric of her dress. "Can you tell me your name?" Nathaniel asked, still keeping his voice to that soft whisper. "You do not have to if you do not want to, but I would like to know what to call you." For a long moment he thought she would not answer. Then, in a voice so quiet he had to strain to hear it, she said, "Delilah. Delilah Reid. Delilah," he repeated, letting the name settle between them. "That is a fine name. Miss Reid, do you have somewhere safe to go? Family, friends?" She shook her head, a tiny movement. "My father died last month, pneumonia. We had a cabin outside town, but Mr. Hutchins, the man who was just here, he says we owed him money for supplies. He took the cabin. I have been sleeping in the church, but Reverend Morrison said I cannot stay there anymore. He said it was not proper." Nathaniel felt a flash of anger at the Reverend, at the man called Hutchins, at a world that could leave a terrified young woman with nowhere to turn. But he kept his voice soft and even. "The boarding house has rooms. I can pay for one for you just for tonight until we figure something else out. I do not have money to repay you. I am not asking for repayment." She finally looked at him then, really looked at him, and he saw confusion in her eyes alongside the fear. He supposed she was not used to kindness without strings attached. That made him angry too, though he did not show it. "Why?" she asked. It was a fair question. Nathaniel thought about it for a moment before answering. "Because someone should," he said simply. "Because you need help and I can give it. That is reason enough." He stood slowly, telegraphing his movements so as not to startle her. "The boarding house is just at the end of the street. Mrs. Fletcher runs it. She is a kind woman. I will walk ahead of you if you want, so you know I am not going to do anything sudden, or I can walk beside you. Whatever makes you feel safest." Delilah pushed away from the wall, her movements hesitant. "Beside," she whispered, "so I can see you." They walked down the main street of Platteville together, an odd pair that drew a few curious glances from the townspeople. Nathaniel kept his hands visible and his pace slow. He did not try to make conversation, sensing that silence was what she needed right now. The boarding house was a 2-story structure painted white, with a wide porch and flower boxes in the windows. Mrs. Fletcher, a stout woman in her 50s with gray hair pulled back in a bun, answered Nathaniel's knock with a welcoming smile that faltered slightly when she saw Delilah's haunted expression. "Nathaniel Anders, madam," he said, removing his hat. "I am looking to rent 2 rooms for the week. One for myself and one for Miss Reid here. She has fallen on hard times and needs a safe place to stay." Mrs. Fletcher's expression softened. She looked at Delilah with the practiced eye of a woman who had seen much of life and understood more than most. "Of course. Come in, both of you. Miss Reid, you look like you could use a hot meal and a bath. I will have my daughter Sarah bring up some water for you." The boarding house was clean and comfortable, with lace curtains and the smell of baking bread. Nathaniel paid Mrs. Fletcher for both rooms, ignoring Delilah's weak protest. His room was on the 2nd floor, a simple space with a bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the street. Delilah's room was next to his, separated by a thin wall. He showed her where it was, then stepped back. "You lock that door," he said softly. "Do not open it for anyone unless you want to." If you need anything, anything at all, you can knock on my door. I will be here." She nodded, still not quite meeting his eyes, and slipped into her room. He heard the lock click into place and felt a small measure of relief. At least she would be safe tonight. Nathaniel went downstairs and found Mrs. Fletcher in the kitchen, where she was rolling out dough for biscuits. She looked up when he entered and gestured for him to sit at the table. "That girl has been through something terrible," she said bluntly. "I have seen that look before. My sister had it after her husband got mean with drink." "I gathered as much," Nathaniel said. "I found her being harassed by a man named Hutchins. Do you know him?" Mrs. Fletcher's mouth tightened. "Frank Hutchins. He runs the general store, but mostly he runs up debts against people and then takes what they own when they cannot pay. Legal, technically, but not right. Delilah's father, Thomas Reed, was a good man but not a smart one when it came to money. He bought supplies on credit all winter, thinking he would strike gold come spring. Instead, he caught pneumonia and died. Hutchins has been after that poor girl ever since. Is he the reason she is so frightened? Partly, maybe, but I think there is more to it than that. Her mother died when she was young, and Thomas raised her alone out in that cabin. They did not come to town much. There were rumors, nothing concrete, but people talked. Some said Thomas had a temper. Others said he was just trying to protect his daughter from the rougher elements. Hard to know the truth. Nathaniel absorbed this information, fitting the pieces together. A dead mother, a father who isolated his daughter, a girl who flinched at raised voices. The picture was not a pretty one. "She has nowhere to go," he said. "No family, no money. She could work," Mrs. Fletcher said. "But in a town like this, jobs for respectable women are few. She could be a washerwoman or a maid, but Hutchins has been telling people she is unreliable, trying to ruin her reputation, so she will have no choice but to come to him for help. And his help would come with a price no decent woman would want to pay." Anger burned in Nathaniel's chest, hot and fierce. He had dealt with plenty of outlaws in his time, men who robbed and killed for money or revenge or just for the thrill of it. But men like Hutchins, who used the law and social standing to prey on the vulnerable, they were a different kind of evil. They hid behind respectability while doing things just as vile as any outlaw. "I will not let that happen," Nathaniel said. Mrs. Fletcher studied him with sharp eyes. "You planning to stay in Platteville, then?" He had not been. But as soon as she asked the question, Nathaniel realized that his plans had changed. He could not ride away and leave Delilah to fend for herself. Maybe it was foolish, getting involved in a situation that was not his concern. Maybe it would cost him time and money he did not have to spare. But he had given his word that she was safe, and Nathaniel Anders did not break his word. "For a while, at least," he said. "Until I know she will be all right." Mrs. Fletcher smiled, a knowing look in her eyes. "You are a good man, Nathaniel Anders. There are not many of those around here." That evening, Nathaniel sat in the boarding house parlor, a book open on his lap that he was not really reading. His mind kept drifting to the young woman in the room upstairs, wondering if she was all right, if she was able to eat the food Mrs. Fletcher had sent up, if she was sleeping or lying awake in fear. He knew he could not fix everything that was broken in her life, but he found himself wanting to try. The next morning, Nathaniel woke early, as was his habit. He washed and dressed, then went downstairs to find breakfast already laid out in the dining room. Mrs. Fletcher's cooking was excellent, and he was halfway through a plate of eggs and ham when he heard soft footsteps on the stairs. He looked up to see Delilah hovering in the doorway, looking uncertain. "Good morning," he said softly, remembering his promise. "There is plenty of food. You should eat." She approached slowly, taking a seat at the far end of the table. Mrs. Fletcher bustled in with a plate for her, offering a warm smile and a gentle pat on the shoulder that made Delilah stiffen but not pull away. Progress, Nathaniel thought. They ate in silence for a few minutes. Nathaniel was acutely aware of every movement he made, trying not to startle her with sudden gestures. Finally, when they had both finished eating, he cleared his throat softly. "Miss Reed, I have been thinking about your situation," he said. "You need work and you need a place to stay. Mrs. Fletcher mentioned that she could use help around the boarding house. It would not pay much, but it would include room and board, and you would be safe here. Would that be something you might be interested in?" Delilah looked at Mrs. Fletcher, who nodded encouragingly. "I could certainly use an extra pair of hands," the older woman said. "Cooking, cleaning, changing linens. Nothing too difficult, and you would have a roof over your head and 3 meals a day." "I would like that," Delilah said quietly. "Thank you." "No thanks needed, dear. We will consider it settled." Nathaniel felt some of the tension leave his shoulders. At least she would be safe and fed. But he knew that safety and food were not enough to heal whatever wounds she carried. That would take time, patience, and something he was not sure he knew how to give. Over the next few days, Nathaniel found himself settling into a routine in Platteville. He helped Mrs. Fletcher with repairs around the boarding house, things that needed a man's strength or skill with tools. He made inquiries around town about work, not because he needed money desperately, but because staying idle made him restless. He was offered a job helping at the livery stable, which he accepted. The work was honest and kept him close enough to the boarding house that he could check on Delilah regularly. She was slowly beginning to emerge from her shell, though the process was painfully gradual. The first time Nathaniel saw her smile, it was in response to something Sarah Fletcher, Mrs. Fletcher's teenage daughter, said while they were hanging laundry. The smile was small and fleeting, but it transformed her face, giving him a glimpse of the person she might have been before fear had claimed her. He was careful to keep his interactions with her brief and non-threatening. He spoke only when necessary, always in that soft voice he had promised. He never touched her, never stood too close, never made sudden movements in her presence. It must have looked strange to the other boarders, the way he treated her like a skittish colt that might bolt at any moment. But Nathaniel did not care what others thought. One evening, about a week after Delilah had started working at the boarding house, Nathaniel was sitting on the porch reading when she came out and sat in the chair at the far end. She did not say anything, just sat there watching the sun set over the mountains. It was the first time she had voluntarily sought his company, and Nathaniel took it as the gift it was. "It is beautiful, is it not?" he said softly, gesturing to the orange and pink sky. "Yes," she replied. Then, after a pause, "My mother used to say that sunsets were God's way of painting hope at the end of every day. No matter how hard the day was, there was always beauty waiting at the end of it. Your mother sounds like she was a wise woman." "She was. I wish I remembered her better." "I was only 6 when she died." Nathaniel did not push for more information, but Delilah seemed to want to talk. After a long silence, she continued. "My father loved her very much. I think losing her broke something in him. He was never the same after. He got angry so easily over the smallest things. He would yell, and sometimes he would." She trailed off, her hands twisting in her lap. "You do not have to tell me," Nathaniel said gently. "I know, but I think I want to. I have never told anyone before." She took a shaky breath. "He would hit me. Not all the time, but enough. And he would yell such terrible things. He said I was stupid, that I was worthless, that I would never amount to anything. He said it was my fault my mother died, because if she had not been pregnant with my little brother who died with her, she would still be alive." Nathaniel's hands clenched on the arms of his chair, but he kept his voice soft and steady. "None of that was true. You know that, do not you?" What happened to your mother was not your fault, and the things your father said, they were lies born from his pain. But that does not make what he did to you right. I know that in my head, Delilah said, but my heart has a harder time believing it. When I hear loud voices, I just feel like that scared little girl again, waiting for the blow to fall. I hate that I am like this. I hate that I cannot just be normal. You are normal, Nathaniel said firmly but gently. You survived something terrible and you are still here, still fighting. That takes strength, Delilah, more strength than most people ever need to find. She looked at him then, really looked at him, and for the first time since he had met her, there were tears in her eyes. Why are you being so kind to me? You do not even know me. I do not need to know you to see that you deserve kindness, Nathaniel said. Everyone does, and maybe I am being selfish too. Maybe helping you helps me feel like I am doing something right in a world that often feels wrong. A tear slipped down her cheek, and she wiped it away quickly. Thank you, she whispered, for everything, for helping me that day, for speaking softly, for treating me like I am not broken. You are not broken, Nathaniel said. You are healing. There is a difference. They sat together in comfortable silence as the last light faded from the sky and stars began to appear overhead. Nathaniel felt something shift between them, a tentative connection forming. He found himself thinking that Delilah Reed was one of the strongest people he had ever met, even if she did not see it herself. The weeks that followed brought changes to both their lives. Delilah grew more confident in her work at the boarding house, and the constant fear that had haunted her began to recede, though it never entirely disappeared. There were still bad days, when a sudden noise would send her into a panic, or when she would withdraw into herself and barely speak. But there were good days too, and those became more frequent as time passed. Nathaniel found himself thinking about her more than he probably should. He admired her courage, the way she faced each day despite the wounds she carried. He found himself watching for her smile, listening for her soft laugh when Sarah said something amusing. He looked forward to their evening conversations on the porch, when she would talk about her dreams, small things like wanting to learn to read better or to plant a garden someday. It was Mrs. Fletcher who pointed out what he had been trying not to admit to himself. She cornered him in the kitchen one morning while he was having coffee. "You have feelings for her," she said bluntly. Nathaniel nearly choked on his coffee. "What? Do not play dumb with me, Nathaniel Anders. I have eyes. The way you look at her, the way you are always finding excuses to be nearby. You care for that girl." He could not deny it. "Maybe I do," he admitted. "But it does not matter. She has been through too much. The last thing she needs is a man complicating her life. Or maybe, Mrs. Fletcher said, the right man is exactly what she needs. Someone patient, kind, who makes her feel safe. Someone like you. I do not want to frighten her or make her feel pressured." "Then do not. Just keep being yourself. Let things develop naturally. And Nathaniel, I do not think you are the only one with feelings. I have seen the way she looks at you too." That conversation stayed with Nathaniel for days. He found himself noticing small things, like how Delilah's face would light up when she saw him, or how she had started sitting closer to him on the porch, the distance between their chairs slowly shrinking. He noticed how she would sometimes touch his hand briefly when passing him something, a fleeting contact that sent warmth through his whole body. He was falling in love with her. The realization hit him one evening as he watched her helping Mrs. Fletcher prepare dinner, her movements graceful and sure, her face peaceful in a way it had not been when they first met. He loved her strength, her gentleness, her determination to heal. He loved the way she spoke about small beauties in the world, finding joy in things others overlooked. He loved everything about her, and it terrified him because he did not know if she could ever feel the same way about him. It was a Saturday in late August when things changed between them. Mrs. Fletcher had given Delilah the afternoon off, and Nathaniel offered to take her to see the town's small library, knowing how much she wanted to improve her reading. They walked through the dusty streets together, and Nathaniel found himself hyper-aware of her presence beside him. She wore a new dress that Mrs. Fletcher had helped her make, a soft blue that brought out the color of her eyes. The library was a modest building, but it held treasures for someone like Delilah, who had been starved for books most of her life. She moved among the shelves with wonder, running her fingers lightly over the spines. Nathaniel watched her, his heart full. "Nathaniel," she said softly, turning to face him with a book clutched to her chest, "can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why did you stay? In Platteville, I mean." "You were just passing through when we met. You could have left any time, but you are still here. Is it really just because of me?" He could have lied, could have made up some excuse about liking the town or the work, but Delilah deserved honesty. "Yes," he said simply. "I stayed because of you. Because I wanted to make sure you were safe and all right. And now that I am safe and all right, will you leave?" The question held an undercurrent of emotion that made Nathaniel's pulse quicken. "I do not want to leave," he said carefully, "but I will if you want me to. If my presence makes you uncomfortable or if you would rather I went." "No," she said quickly. "I do not want you to go. I just wanted to understand why you are here." She took a step closer to him, a brave gesture for someone who had been afraid of closeness for so long. "I need to tell you something. These past weeks, you have been the kindest person I have ever known. You have been patient with me, gentle, never pushing me or making me feel weak. You have helped me feel safe for the first time in longer than I can remember. And somewhere along the way, I started to feel something more than gratitude." Nathaniel's heart was pounding now. "What do you feel?" Delilah took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "I think I am falling in love with you. I know that might sound crazy. I know I am probably not ready for that, and maybe you do not feel the same way, but I needed to tell you. I needed you to know." For a moment, Nathaniel could not speak. Then he reached out slowly, telegraphing his intention, and took her hand in his. It was the first time he had really touched her, and her fingers were small and warm in his palm. "Delilah," he said softly, "I have been in love with you for weeks now. I just did not think I had the right to tell you. I did not want to put any pressure on you or make you feel like you owed me anything." "You have never made me feel that way," she said. "You have only ever made me feel valued and respected. That is why I love you." He wanted to kiss her, but he held back, knowing that she needed to be the one to decide when she was ready for that kind of intimacy. Instead, he squeezed her hand gently. "We can take this as slowly as you need," he said. "There is no rush. We have all the time in the world." She smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Can I hug you?" she asked. "If you want to." She stepped into his arms hesitantly, and he held her gently as if she were something precious and fragile. She was trembling slightly, but she did not pull away. Gradually, he felt her relax against him, her head resting on his chest. They stood like that for a long time, surrounded by books and the quiet peace of the library, two damaged people finding healing in each other. The months that followed were among the happiest of Nathaniel's life. He and Delilah courted properly, going on walks, sharing meals, spending evenings talking on the porch. He continued to work at the livery stable, and she continued to help at the boarding house. They were building a life together, slowly and carefully, respecting each other's boundaries and pasts. Delilah continued to heal, though there were setbacks. One day in September, Frank Hutchins cornered her in the general store when Nathaniel was not with her. He grabbed her arm and made crude suggestions about how she could repay her father's debt. Delilah froze initially, the old fear threatening to overwhelm her. But then she thought of Nathaniel, of his gentle strength, and she found her own voice. "Let go of me," she said, her voice low but firm. "I do not owe you anything. My father's death canceled his debts as far as I am concerned. And if you ever touch me again, I will tell Marshal Perkins exactly what you have been doing." Hutchins released her, surprised by her resistance. "You have gotten bold," he sneered. "That cowboy of yours putting ideas in your head." "Nathaniel has taught me that I deserve to be treated with respect," Delilah said. "Something you clearly know nothing about." She walked out of the store with her head high, her heart pounding but her spirit triumphant. When she told Nathaniel about the encounter, he was both proud of her and furious at Hutchins. He wanted to confront the man, but Delilah stopped him. "I handled it," she said. "I am not the scared girl I was when you found me. I am stronger now, and I need to fight some of my own battles. But thank you for making me believe I could." Nathaniel understood, even though every protective instinct in him wanted to keep her from ever facing anything frightening again. He was learning that real love meant supporting someone in becoming their strongest self, not sheltering them from every difficulty. That winter, Nathaniel asked Delilah to marry him. It was not a grand gesture with speeches and fanfare. They were sitting on the porch, bundled in blankets against the cold, watching snow fall softly from a gray sky. He simply took her hand and said, "I want to spend the rest of my life with you if you will have me." Delilah turned to him, her eyes bright with tears. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed in January of 1879, in a simple ceremony at the church with Mrs. Fletcher and her family as witnesses. Delilah wore a cream-colored dress that Mrs. Fletcher had helped her sew, and Nathaniel wore his best suit. When the Reverend pronounced them husband and wife, Nathaniel kissed her gently, mindful even now of her need for softness. But Delilah surprised him by deepening the kiss, showing him without words that she trusted him completely. They moved into a small house on the edge of town, a place with 2 bedrooms, a kitchen, and a parlor. It was not much, but it was theirs. Delilah planted the garden she had dreamed of, and Nathaniel built a fence around it to keep the rabbits out. They fell into the rhythms of married life, learning each other in new ways, building intimacy both physical and emotional. Nathaniel was endlessly patient with his wife, never pushing her, always letting her set the pace. Their wedding night had been tender and sweet, and if Delilah had been nervous at first, Nathaniel's gentle care had eased her fears. She discovered that physical love did not have to be frightening or painful, that it could be beautiful when shared with someone who truly loved you. The years that followed brought both challenges and joys. Nathaniel continued his work at the livery stable, eventually becoming a partner in the business. Delilah took in sewing and helped Mrs. Fletcher at the boarding house when extra hands were needed. They saved their money carefully, planning for the future. In the spring of 1880, Delilah discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and trepidation. Delilah worried that she would not be a good mother, that the scars from her childhood would somehow mark her child. Nathaniel reassured her constantly, reminding her that she was strong and loving and nothing like her father had been. "You are going to be a wonderful mother," he told her one evening as they sat together, his hand resting on her growing belly. "I have seen how gentle you are, how much love you have to give. Our child is lucky to have you." "And you," Delilah said, covering his hand with hers, "you will be an amazing father. You are the kindest man I have ever known." Their son was born in December of 1880, a healthy boy with a strong set of lungs and his mother's dark eyes. They named him Thomas, after Delilah's father, because despite everything, she wanted to remember the good parts of him. The man he had been before grief had twisted him into something cruel. Little Thomas was a source of endless wonder to both his parents. Nathaniel would sit for hours just watching the baby sleep, marveling at the tiny fingers and toes. Delilah was a natural mother, her fears proving unfounded as maternal instinct took over. Frank Hutchins had left Platteville not long after Delilah and Nathaniel's wedding, run out of town when Marshal Perkins finally gathered enough evidence to charge him with fraud. No one missed him, and his departure lifted a shadow from Delilah's life. She no longer had to worry about encountering him on the street or hearing his threatening voice. As Thomas grew, becoming a toddler and then a little boy, Nathaniel and Delilah talked about having more children. They both wanted a large family, a house full of love and laughter to replace the loneliness they had each experienced in different ways. A daughter, Rebecca, was born in 1883, followed by another son, James, in 1885. Each child was welcomed with joy and raised with an abundance of affection. Nathaniel was careful never to raise his voice in anger around his children or his wife. He had seen what harsh words and violence could do, and he was determined that his family would never know that kind of fear. When discipline was needed, he was firm but gentle, explaining why certain behaviors were wrong rather than simply punishing them. His children grew up knowing they were loved unconditionally, and that security gave them confidence to explore the world. Delilah blossomed in those years. The frightened girl who had flinched at voices was gone, replaced by a strong woman who ran her household with quiet efficiency and loved her family fiercely. She still had moments when old fears would surface, particularly if she heard angry shouting or saw violence of any kind. But Nathaniel was always there to ground her, to remind her that she was safe, that nothing could hurt her now. The livery stable business prospered, and eventually Nathaniel and his partner expanded, buying a second stable in a neighboring town. The Anders family moved to a larger house, one with enough bedrooms for all the children and a spacious yard where they could play. Delilah's garden grew larger each year, becoming famous in Platteville for its vegetables and flowers. In 1888, tragedy struck when Mrs. Fletcher passed away peacefully in her sleep. Delilah grieved deeply for the woman who had been like a mother to her, who had given her a job and a safe place when she had nothing. But she also felt grateful for the years they had shared, for all the wisdom and kindness Mrs. Fletcher had imparted. Sarah Fletcher, now married with children of her own, inherited the boarding house and continued to run it much as her mother had. As the children grew older, Nathaniel told them the story of how he had met their mother. They loved the tale, making him repeat it over and over. He always told it the same way, never glossing over the difficult parts, wanting them to understand that sometimes people needed help, and offering that help was one of the most important things a person could do. "Your mother was the bravest person I ever met," he would say. Even when she was scared, she kept going. She survived and she healed, and she became this incredible woman who raised you all with so much love. Never forget that strength comes in many forms, and sometimes the quietest people are the strongest. Thomas, their eldest, grew into a serious young man who wanted to study law. Rebecca was spirited and artistic, always drawing or painting. James was the adventurer, constantly exploring and getting into harmless mischief. A fourth child, a daughter named Grace, arrived unexpectedly in 1890, completing their family. The years passed in the way of all years, bringing changes both large and small. Colorado continued to grow and develop, with more towns springing up and the railroad connecting remote places to the wider world. Platteville remained a modest town, but it was home, and the Anders family had deep roots there. In 1895, on their 16th wedding anniversary, Nathaniel and Delilah took a rare evening alone, leaving the children with Sarah Fletcher. They returned to the spot where they had first met, the alley between the general store and what had been the boarding house. The buildings were different now. Some had been torn down and rebuilt, but the place held significance for them. "You remember that day?" Nathaniel asked softly, taking Delilah's hand. "How could I forget?" she said with a smile. "The day my life changed. The day I met a cowboy who spoke softly and kept his word." "I was so angry that day," Nathaniel admitted. "Angry at that man for frightening you, angry at a world that had hurt you so badly, but I was determined to help you if I could." "You did more than help me," Delilah said, moving closer to him. "You saved me. You gave me a reason to heal, to be brave, to believe that life could be good. You gave me love and family and a home. You gave me everything." "We gave each other everything," Nathaniel corrected gently. "You saved me too, Delilah. Before I met you, I was just drifting from town to town, never putting down roots, never letting anyone get close. You taught me what it meant to truly love someone, to build a life with purpose and meaning. You made me want to be a better man." They stood together in the gathering dusk, holding each other close. Two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful from their shared wounds and strengths. The children grew and eventually left home, one by one, to pursue their own dreams and build their own lives. Thomas became a lawyer in Denver, fighting for justice for those who could not fight for themselves. Rebecca married an artist and moved to San Francisco, where she opened a gallery. James went west to explore the untamed territories, sending letters full of adventure. Grace became a teacher in Platteville, staying close to home and her parents. Nathaniel and Delilah grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They became grandparents and eventually great-grandparents, their house always open and welcoming to family. Nathaniel's hair turned gray and then white, and his hands became gnarled with age, but his voice remained gentle, and his love for his wife never wavered. Delilah's face gained lines and her dark hair turned silver, but her spirit remained strong, and she never forgot how blessed she was to have found such love. In the spring of 1910, they celebrated their 31st wedding anniversary. All four children returned home with their families, filling the house with noise and laughter. Nathaniel stood on the porch, watching his grandchildren play in the yard while Delilah sat beside him in a rocking chair, her hand in his. "We built something good, did we not?" he said softly. "We built something wonderful," Delilah agreed. "A family, a legacy of love. Those children out there and their children, they will carry on what we started. They will know what it means to be loved, to be safe, to be valued. That is worth more than all the gold in Colorado." "I love you," Nathaniel said, as he had said countless times over the years. "More today than yesterday and less than tomorrow." "And I love you," Delilah replied, squeezing his hand. "My gentle cowboy who whispered when I needed softness, who kept his word, who showed me that life could be beautiful." They sat together as the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant colors, surrounded by the love they had created and nurtured. The frightened girl and the kind cowboy were still there, somewhere deep inside, but they had been transformed by time and love into something even more precious. They had become partners, companions, the deepest kind of friends. They had become each other's home. The years that followed brought the inevitable changes of aging. Nathaniel's health began to fail in his 70s, his strong body finally showing the wear of decades of hard work. Delilah cared for him with the same gentle devotion he had always shown her, never complaining, always there with a soft touch and loving words. He passed peacefully in his sleep in 1918, with Delilah beside him, holding his hand as she had held it so many times before. The grief was crushing, but Delilah did not break. She had learned long ago that she was stronger than she seemed. She mourned her husband deeply, but she also celebrated the life they had shared, the love that had sustained them through everything. She lived on for another 8 years, surrounded by her children and grandchildren, telling stories of Nathaniel, making sure they understood what a remarkable man he had been. When Delilah Reed Anders died in 1926, at the age of 69, she was buried beside her husband in the Platteville Cemetery. Their graves were marked with simple stones that bore their names and the dates of their births and deaths. But the true marker of their lives was not in stone. It was in the descendants who carried on their legacy of love and kindness, in the family they had built together, in the story of a frightened girl who found her strength, and a gentle cowboy who knew the power of a soft voice and a kept promise. Their story became part of the town's history, told and retold over the years. The details might have changed in the telling, embellished or simplified, but the core truth remained. It was a story of compassion conquering fear, of love healing wounds, of two imperfect people who found each other at the right moment and chose to build a life together. It was a story of the Wild West, but not the version told in dime novels with gunfights and outlaws. It was the real West, where ordinary people faced extraordinary challenges, and sometimes, if they were very lucky, found extraordinary love. The house where Nathaniel and Delilah had raised their family stood for many years, eventually being torn down to make way for new development. But the land remembered them, and the town remembered them, and most importantly, their family remembered them. Each generation told the story to the next, of how their family had begun with a cowboy who spoke softly, and a girl who learned to be brave, who loved each other through everything and built something that lasted beyond their own lives. In the end, that was what mattered most. Not the hardships they had faced or the fears they had overcome, but the love they had shared and the family they had created. Their story was proof that even in the hardest of times, in the roughest of places, gentleness could triumph. That soft words could be stronger than harsh ones, that patience could heal what violence had broken, that love could transform everything it touched. Nathaniel had once told Delilah that she was not broken, only healing. By the end of her life, she was whole, made complete not by fixing what had been damaged but by accepting herself, and being accepted by someone who loved her exactly as she was. And Nathaniel, who had drifted aimlessly before finding her, had discovered that the greatest adventure was not in traveling from place to place, but in staying, in putting down roots, in building something that would outlast him. Their love story was not easy or simple. It did not solve all their problems or make their lives perfect, but it gave them both what they needed most: a place to belong, a person to trust, a reason to keep going even when things were hard. It gave them joy and purpose and a legacy that stretched forward through time. In the small cemetery in Platteville, Colorado, their graves lie side by side, weathered by time but enduring. When the wind blows through the cottonwood trees, it carries whispers of their story, of a promise kept and a love that conquered fear. Visitors sometimes stop to read the stones, wondering about the people buried there, not knowing the remarkable story of courage and devotion that those simple names represent. But the story lives on in other ways, in the descendants who visit the graves and tell their children about their great-great-grandparents, in the town records that note Nathaniel Anders as a respected businessman and Delilah Reed Anders as a beloved member of the community. It lives on in the values they pass down, the belief that kindness matters, that keeping your word matters, that treating people with gentleness and respect can change lives. The Wild West was a hard place, full of danger and hardship. But it was also a place where people like Nathaniel and Delilah could find each other, could build something beautiful from nothing, could create hope where there had been despair. Their story reminds us that history is not just made by famous people doing great deeds. It is made by ordinary people doing small acts of kindness, by choosing love over fear, by keeping promises even when it would be easier not to. On a spring morning in 1878, a frightened girl met a gentle cowboy in an alley in Platteville. From that encounter came a love that lasted a lifetime, a family that spanned generations, and a story worth remembering. It was not the story either of them might have imagined for themselves, but it was exactly the story they needed. And in the end, that made it perfect.